different tonight. All right, we'll maybe back it off a hair. Jeremy, if you would back it off just a little bit. The microphone. Okay. Or not. Okay, all right. I didn't see any movement back there, so you must, but I can tell, All right, thank you, I appreciate that. Clearly I don't understand how things work back there, and I prefer to keep it that way, so. All right, let me make a few announcements before we dive in this evening. Most of you know that we are in the midst of what we call our annual Missions Emphasis Week. It's not that we don't want to emphasize our mission and our participation with those who are taking the message of Christ into the world, beyond just Flat Rock and the general region here. But once a year, we set aside a week for a focus on that part of who we are and what we're doing. And we bring in missionary guests. It's informative. It helps us to be aware of what's going on in other places. So this past Sunday, we had a missionary and his family that we have been helping support for the past 13 years now. Matt Gass is his name. He and his wife Laura and their 4 children serving the Lord in Zambia and has done church planting in Tanzania. It was just a really good update that we received from Matt Gass on Sunday. This weekend, we have a number of things going on, and I want to extend an invitation to all of you to be here and participate in the events on the weekend. Saturday, 9 a.m. on Saturday, we have a men's prayer breakfast that is going to take place. Now, we love the contribution that our brother Dave Dossett makes every men's meeting, the first Saturday of the month. He always feeds us and feeds us well, and we think it's wonderful. But this is a little different. We have quite the menu that's coming up, and we have a number of the ladies of the church who are going to be providing the food. So you come and you won't be disappointed in the food. But more than that, there's going to be spiritual nourishment. We have a missionary who's going to be here with us. His name is Jansen Lorch. He is on his way to Chile, and he is going to give us an update on his ministry plans. So be an opportunity for us to be an encouragement to him. We'll also have some other guests who will be here on Saturday morning. They're going to be here throughout the weekend. They represent a ministry in Louisiana called Southland Christian Ministries. They do a number of things. They run a camp, they do musical training, they put on seminars regarding worship, just a wide-ranging ministry. We've had some of their staff here at our church in the past. Some of you might remember Scott and Jill Johnson, who've been with us here. But they're involved in Southland Christian Ministry. But this particular group they are traveling representatives of the ministry. And they sing and play instruments and do so wonderfully. So I've asked them if they would provide just one musical piece at our men's prayer breakfast. They will be involved in the services on Sunday, worship service, and again in the evening, which will be our annual harvest dinner. And you will be delighted by their ministry. For those with children, the Southland Singers are going to combine our children into one class and meet with them during Sunday school on Sunday. While we're in here getting an update from John Crocker, who is the director of Gospel Fellowship Association. It's a missions agency that is centered in Greenville, South Carolina. He's coming up to preach for us, present GFA, and also talk about some of the work that's being done around the world through GFA. It's a busy weekend filled with many opportunities. I trust that you will avail yourself of all of this. And in fact, guys, if you haven't done so already, before you leave tonight, go by the bulletin boards beside the church office. There's a sign-up sheet for the men's prayer breakfast. Make sure that you sign up. If you're going to bring your sons, put them down as well, or you can put your name +1, +2, whatever. But it's always helpful to know how many people we're feeding. So make sure that you swing by there, sign up, and then we'll have a great time here on Saturday morning. All right? Okay, we are going to begin today in where we left off in John chapter 18. Let me get that up here. John chapter 18. Now, as we have been working our way through the conclusion of Jesus' Passion Week, in fact, let me pause right there and remind you what we mean by his Passion Week. The word passion can be used in a way that refers to suffering. Jesus' Passion Week, that's a common expression, but it means the week of his suffering. So it's the run-up to the cross. And of course, then the conclusion of it all is when he comes out of the grave on that first, what we call Easter Sunday morning. But we are working toward the conclusion of his Passion Week. He's had his final meeting with his disciples. They've gone across the Kidron Valley on the east side of the city of Jerusalem and up on the slopes of what is called the Mount of Olives. They went there for prayer. We saw that Judas brought soldiers there along with the rulers of the it's called the Sanhedrin. It's the ruling body of the Jews. They came, chief priest was there, and they arrested Jesus and then took him to the home of the high priest. So as we have been looking at these events, we've been using the lens of injustice to analyze what goes on. And I've suggested to you that though the scripture doesn't use that particular term, we see it all the way through that Jesus is treated with injustice. I mean, what could be worse than what Judas did? Judas, one of his own, whom he loved, betrayed him. Last week, we saw that in the courtyard of Caiaphas, the high priest, Peter, this man who was part of Jesus' inner circle, he had these three disciples that held a privileged position, Peter and James and John. And yet Peter denied the Lord Jesus. How painful must that have been? You remember, we saw toward the end of the lesson last week that at the moment Peter fulfilled Jesus' prophecy, that before the rooster would crow, Peter would deny Jesus 3 times. And indeed, when the rooster crowed, after he denied him 3 times, the Gospel of Luke describes how Jesus, being moved from one place to another within the compound there, looked over and locked eyes with Peter just after he had uttered those words and the rooster crowed. What a painful thing. What a painful thing. Tonight, we're going to look at one of the other characters in the development of this story of the climactic moment of the Passion Week. We're going to look at Pontius Pilate, who was the governor of that region. He was the Roman governor of that region. We find that Judas was a betrayer. Peter was a denier. Well, how would we describe Pontius Pilate? I will describe him as a coward. Pilate is a coward, and his cowardice contributed to this injustice that took Jesus to the cross. I want to approach our time together a little bit differently tonight. I want to begin by giving you a fairly substantial bit of historical background about Pilate. And then we will end up taking what we learn about him from history into our reading of the text. And we will read through the text. And once we've done that, then toward the end of our time together, I'll make some assessments about the character of Pilate, and do so in a way that I hope will help us think carefully about what we see when we look in the mirror. We have a tendency to look at these characters and distance ourselves from them. I'm nothing like these people. Well, we'll see. Let's begin by having this little historical background of Pontius Pilate. You know, there were many historians who lived during that particular period of time. They were contemporaries of those in this account. They might have been from other parts of the empire. Some of them, though, were very familiar with what went on in Judea at this particular point. But we have material that was written that has survived through the centuries, and we can study that and reach some conclusions about what went on in those days. And so we begin here with a few of the details regarding Pontius Pilate. Pilate was not from this region. In fact, he was a native of what we call Spain. And so he was born in Spain, he grew up in Spain. In fact, he grew up in the city of Seville. Now, Seville is a famous Spanish city today. In this particular time, Seville was not held in high regard within the Roman Empire. It was, to put it nicely, it was considered provincial, which is a nice way of saying they were backwoods hicks and were treated as such. So this was the beginnings for Pontius Pilate. But as a young man, he signed up to serve in the Roman legion. And he made a name for himself through a series of wars that Rome was fighting. And then after the wars subsided and there was a relative peace of Rome, maybe you've heard that expression, he decided that he wasn't going to go back to Seville. He was going to go to the city of Rome and make his fortune there. Well, when Pontius Pilate went into Rome, the city of Rome, he began to seek out the kinds of society that would bring him in contact with important people. He made friends with a woman who was named Claudia. In fact, he would end up marrying Claudia. The interesting thing about Claudia was that her father's name, her grandfather's name, I skipped a generation there, her grandfather's name was Augustus. Now, have you heard that name before? If not, you can write in your margin there a cross-reference. It is Luke chapter 2 and verse 1. The Christmas story, as is often read, begins with the words, "And in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed." And that set in motion all of the things that took place to move Joseph and his wife Mary from Nazareth down to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. But Caesar Augustus, yes, that Augustus, the one who was the emperor of Rome. So Pilate met his granddaughter, her name was Julia, and ended up marrying her, which of course brought him into contact with many powerful, influential people. By the way, you need to know this. I think this tells a little bit about Pilate's character. In order to pursue Claudia, the woman who would become his wife, he had to go through her mother. Her mother kept tight control on her relationships. So Pilate ended up working to befriend her mother. Now, her mother's name was Julia. And Julia was, of course, Augustus' daughter. She was so wild that her father banished her from Rome. Her father first put her on a little tiny island, about a mile square, and didn't allow anyone to visit her without approval. And no men were ever allowed on that little island. Later on, he sent her to another place on the mainland, but she was not allowed to return to Rome because of her wild tendencies. Well, this is the woman that Pilate befriended in order to be able to woo her daughter. Now, I don't know all of the details of that, but I think it probably unveils a few things about Pilate's character. Now, through these connections, Pilate eventually was given a post, government post, ruling in Judea. Now, Judea, of course, is the southern region of today, what we would call Israel. And so he ruled that region where Jerusalem is located. But you need to know that this was not a high post. This was not a substantial post. This was being sent to an insignificant location. When I think about it, I'm reminded of a friend of mine from many decades ago who was serving in the Michigan State Police, and he did something really, really stupid. And rather than firing him, they moved him. They moved him from our area to serve at a post in a town that is so small, you're not even sure you're driving through a town when you go through it. And so they moved him there as a form of punishment. I think of that when I consider Pontius Pilate. He was given a post, yes, but he was given a post in this small, insignificant place on the other side of the world, or so it seemed. So that's how he ended up in our story. Now, he took his position, began to rule in that region as governor in the year AD 26. And when he came to town, Pilate did not get off on the right foot. The night before he arrived in town, he sent in a number of soldiers carrying flags that were emblazoned with the image of the emperor, who at that time was Tiberius. So they came into the city in the middle of the night, set up these flags all through the streets of the city of Jerusalem. And that way he could make a grand entrance. Here's the problem. Flags like that were used in all over the empire to promote what we would call emperor worship. Literally, emperors required people within the empire to show worship. Some even took it so far as to claim that they were gods, though most of them used it for political power. You worship me, and thus you will prove to me your loyalty. But Pilate sent these soldiers in with the flags, and he hadn't a clue. The people that he was there to govern were given by God a set of codes that included 2 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. And you shall not make any graven image, any representation of God. So those flags violated both of those laws of Israel. You know what the Israelites did? They got up early in the morning, saw these flags posted all throughout Jerusalem, and a riot ensued. A riot ensued. They went down to the governor's, I'll call it the governor's mansion, wherever he lived there in Jerusalem, and out in front in the streets, they shouted and chanted, and it was an uproar. And Pilate came out and said, "You will disperse, or I will send my soldiers to take off your heads." Do you know what these Jews did? They all got down on their knees and bared their neck and said, "We would rather die than see our city defiled." Pilate backed off. He lost the day, and he was humiliated. Okay. So this was his first interaction with the strange people in that part of the world who worshiped this strange God. And Yahweh is, of course, their name for him. That wasn't getting off to a very good start. Now, he had several other incidents we won't go into, but this one is interesting. Later on, he decided that he would have the last laugh, so to speak. He would send shields, decorative shields you hang on the wall, with the image of Tiberius. Up north of where he ruled, there was the palace of descendant of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas was his name. And he ruled the northern section there where Galilee is. But sometimes Pilate would have to go up there to have meetings and would meet with the Jews up that direction in order to work through issues that contained both or was of interest in both regions. And so he had Herod place these shields in the meeting hall where this sort of thing would take place. Now, Herod didn't care what the Jews thought about that. He was glad to have the expensive shields hanging on the walls. And once again, the Jews who would come in there to do business were upset. But Pilate didn't care. And so he wouldn't acquiesce, Herod wouldn't acquiesce. And so finally, the Jewish leadership wrote a letter of protest to Tiberius, Caesar of Rome. Now here's the thing you need to know, that the Jews had been so insistent in pushing against any form of desecration, any form of idolatry, that in order to maintain peace, for many years, Rome had deferred to them. You don't cause trouble, and we will rule and allow you your own religious freedom. So Pilate was violating that. And so word came back from Rome. And once again, Pilate was in trouble. And he was shamed publicly. He was humiliated. And so he realized he couldn't force them to do anything against their will. And so it ended up that this kind of relationship between Pilate and the Jews continued throughout the 6 years that he was governor there. Now, I think that comes into play as we work our way through the text here in just a moment. So also, let me just throw this out. Pilate decided that he would engage in a great building program, but it wasn't, though it benefited the people, he didn't do it to benefit the people. He did it for his own glory and his attempt to climb the ladder, so to speak. He built an aqueduct that brought water into the city. That's a great thing, right? The problem is, Pilate raided the temple treasury in order to pay for the project. What kind of fool was he? Take sacred funds from the Jews to do this civil project. So he was in trouble from the beginning and all the way through his 6 years. But when we come to the text that we'll work through here beginning in verse 28 of chapter 18, I'm struck that you have this cruel man, this reckless man, but when we encounter him in this text, it seems as though we're talking about a different sort of man. And I think there were a number of things going on there that we need to work through, maybe bring some of the history into our understanding of the text. So we're going to tell the story here, and as we do, we'll draw from from the four gospel accounts. We'll draw some from the history to shine the light on what we're reading here. But we're going to begin with verse 28 of chapter 18. So, the trial, the illegal trial at Caiaphas' house has ended now. And we read, "Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters, so they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover." Just a moment's explanation there. You understand that the Old Testament required the Jewish people to do certain things and not do certain things, and they could very easily end up violating a law, be pronounced defiled, and they would have to go through a ritual, usually time-consuming, in order to be declared clean again. Doesn't mean that there was anything unsanitary. This was a spiritual matter. But the Jews also added a number of things to the list that the scriptures talked about being able to defile a person. One of the things that they imposed that the scriptures didn't impose was you must not go into the house of a Gentile. Okay, so somebody who's not a Jew, you don't go into that. And then there were, especially if somebody had a particular job that involved certain things. Anyway, they believed that if they went into Pilate's court, into Pilate's house, they would be defiled and they would have to go through a cleansing ritual. And until that was done, they couldn't participate in the Passover meal. And since that meal would be that very evening for them, they didn't go in. So that's an aside about what verse 28 is saying. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" Now, I want you to notice something here with me. What accusation do you bring against this man? That seems to be a very legitimate question for the governor to ask, doesn't it? Look at their response. They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Which is tantamount to saying, you condemn him because we say so. Which doesn't seem very reasonable. Now, I can't prove this, but there have been some authors who've speculated about this. Their speculation, I think, may be onto something, namely that they had arranged all of the details of this. That they had arranged the arrest, the mock trial at Caiaphas' house, ending up at Pilate's courtyard, and then it would just be a perfunctory matter. Bring him before Pilate, Pilate condemns him. Done deal. But it seems like Pilate throws a monkey wrench into it. He wants to start analyzing the charges. It's like he has gone back on the prearranged deal. Now that is a bit speculative, but it seems to explain the unusual part that we have just read. The question is, why would Pilate do such a thing? Seems that he already knew the business at hand. One of the things that John doesn't talk about, we find in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew tells us that at this point, where Jesus is brought to Pilate, Pilate gets a note from his wife Claudia. And it's not a love note. He gets a note, and his wife tells him, I've had a dream about this man. I've been in anxiety about him. Do not condemn him. Now, I don't think that you have to read too much into that. I mean, I assume that Claudia was aware of the discussions going on behind the scenes and that Jesus would be brought there the next morning. I think that she was aware of what was going on, and that would explain a really restless night that God used providentially to upset her, and she in turn passed her discomfort on to her husband at the moment he's going out to see Jesus. So if we assume that Pilate was in on it from the beginning, and then he begins to backtrack, which is kind of the way it reads, it might be that his wife's dream upset him. The Romans were very superstitious, and so that may have been the case. So he says to them, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. The Jews said to him, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. And that was true. Rome didn't allow the Jews to execute anyone. They had to work through the Roman system. But isn't it interesting that we have verse 32? This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die. He had instructed the disciples about the kind of death that he would die. Crucified, lifted up to die. And that is a theme that we've found touched on again and again throughout John's gospel. So we're told right here that the Jewish leaders weren't in control of this. Pilate wasn't in control of this. It was God who was in control of this. This was moving according to the plan of God. So we find here that let's see here. Missed a spot here. Let me let's pick it up with verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Pilate was disgusted at the hint that he would be conversing about this. He says, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Verse 36 is an important verse. Not that the others are unimportant. But notice he says, my kingdom, pardon me. That was not the button I should have hit. Pardon me while I... Yes, ma'am?
You think it's pretty bold of Jesus to say, do you say this of your own accord? I mean, like he was.
Well, I think all the way through, Jesus is bold with him. And I think all the way through, Jesus calls him out. And when you get down here to verse 33, here we go. He says, in verse 33. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord? And Pilate just kind of lashes out. Am I a Jew? Am I a Jew? Your own nation has delivered you over to me. What have you done? And verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to you. Now, I want to point out a couple of things here. If I can get this thing to cooperate. I keep hitting the wrong button. Pardon me there while I try a little different approach here. There we go. All right. I want to point out something to you. My kingdom is not of this world. There are those who say that when the Bible talks about Jesus' kingdom, it's strictly a spiritual kingdom. Okay? And they point to verses such as this. Has nothing to do with this world. It's in your heart. I want you to see specifically what Jesus says here. My kingdom is not of this world. Which would mean my kingdom does not have its origin, its source in this world. He's not saying that my kingdom has nothing to do with this world, as if it's a spiritual kingdom and all other kingdoms are earthly kingdoms. In fact, we know that when he returns and establishes his kingdom, it is going to be, as a friend of mine likes to say, a very earthy kingdom. There will be rule from Jerusalem. There will be a rule over the nations. There will be a rule that handles the economics of the world, and so on and so forth. Very earthy. But he is saying here, my kingdom is a different sort of kingdom than anything you have thought about. My kingdom does not have its origins in this world. In fact, my kingdom doesn't operate according to the principles that guide earthly kingdoms. Okay? And he repeats that here, of course, again in the next line, of this world. Of, in the sense of the origin. It doesn't come from this world. This kingdom of mine comes from another place. Pilate said to him, so you're a king. And Jesus said, you say that I am a king. Then he adds, for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. And what did Pilate say? What is truth? All the way through, we've seen that Jesus came to bring the Word of God that is truth. Jesus is declared to be the way, the truth, and the life. So Jesus came into the world to bear witness to the truth. And he adds, everyone who is of the truth. So here again, this word of, used in a similar way. Everyone whose life originates in the truth then they will listen to my voice. Pilate, what is truth? Well, he went outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. No guilt at all, but Pilate desperately wants to avoid condemning this man. Whatever his motivation, if it was the dream of his wife, whatever the motivation, he desperately wants to avoid condemning the man. Now, a Roman trial had 4 parts, and it seems if we put all of the gospel accounts together, all 4 of these parts were done there before Pilate. There was the indictment, the examination, the defense, and the verdict. Well, here we are at the verdict. I find no guilt in him. Then he tries the first of 2 mediating approaches. Maybe he could come to a compromise with them, satisfy their lust for blood. So he said, you have a custom that I should release 1 man for you at the Passover. So you have this act, this social act of mercy. A condemned criminal, once a year at the Passover, the Roman governor agreed that he would release 1 man as an act of mercy. So he suggested that very thing be done here. He says, so do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? They cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber, and I think that the language that's used here, the original language, has something more than just a robber. It's like he's an insurrectionist, and apparently despised. So here at the end of chapter 18, they're crying for Jesus' blood, and they're willing to give freedom to this insurrectionist in order to kill Jesus. Now, Pilate wasn't through there. Pilate had one more option. He tried to do this mediating position by offering to release Barabbas. Now he is going to take it a step farther, and when we look here in chapter 19, Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. In the Roman penal system, there were 3 levels of beatings that were administered. One level was very severe, but it was the least severe of the 3. There were no beatings that weren't severe, but you had the 3rd level, and then you had another one that was more severe for more serious crimes, but it was not life-threatening. And then there was the 1st level beating. It was intended to prepare a prisoner to die quickly on a cross when crucified. It appears from the gospel accounts that Jesus was beaten twice, and that the first of the beatings, this one recorded right here, was that 1st level of beating. It was severe, but it was the least severe of the 3. It would make him bloody. It would make him swollen. And yet, he would certainly live. And so Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. which meant he turned him over to the soldiers to do this. Text says, soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. Now don't think of the briars that you have, that I have growing in my flower beds. Those hurt, but that's not the kind of thorns. There's a particular kind of bush that grows in that region that is known for thorns that sometimes grow a foot long. And so they wove together a crown. After all, this is the King of the Jews. And you can almost see them sneering as they crush this crown of thorns on his head and put a purple robe. I mean, purple was the insignia of royalty. They came up to him, "Hail, King of the Jews," struck him with their hands. So they beat him. Do you know the book of Isaiah says that he was beaten so badly, he was unrecognizable? So he had him beaten. He thought that this might cause the Jews to relent, that he might satisfy their bloodlust. But instead, they continued to cry out, "Crucify him, crucify him." He brought him out. He was a bloody and bruised and swollen spectacle. He says, "See, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So I had him beaten, but I didn't kill him because I don't think he's guilty. Now there's some great Roman justice. But this is what he said. The crowd had no pity on him. He brought him out wearing the crown of thorns, the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and officers saw him, there's no pity. Instead, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate, I think, a bit appalled at this point. "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." They said, "We have a law, and according to our law, this man ought to die. He ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." We have their words right here. And when Pilate heard that, he was even more afraid. So he was already afraid. Now he's terrified when he hears that this man claimed to be Son of God. I can only imagine that in Pilate's mind, he thought son of a God. But still, this man is deity. Went back in, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. "Will you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus said, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above." Then the last part of verse 11 talks about those who delivered Jesus over to him having greater sin. He's talking about the high priest. And the implication of his statement is, yes, the high priest has greater accountability for this. But that does not mean, Pilate, that you are not guilty. You are guilty. Now, just about out of time, I want you to see here the Jews, he pled once again to be able to release him. The Jews cried out, "If you release this man, You are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. There was a man who was the head of the special guard in Rome who became Caesar's confidant. You can look this up and read about it in history. He became Caesar's confidant, his friend. And if you wanted the favor of the emperor, you befriend Caesar's friend. And if we put the timeline together properly, it seems that about 6 months before what went on in our text, Caesar's friend fell out of favor with Caesar, was executed, and all of his friends were rounded up and executed as well. I think that echoed in the Jews' words. You are no friend of Caesar. And given all that had gone on between Pilate and the Jewish nation there, and all of the bad blood there, I think he understood the threat that was being made. And so he capitulated. Pilate heard these words. He brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Stone Pavement. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him. Shall I crucify your king?" They said, "We have no king but Caesar." He delivered him over to be crucified. We'll take a look at the crucifixion next time. I think that it's important for us to note that this was the time, at the time, that the Passover lamb was being sacrificed. The Lamb of God was handed over for crucifixion. That is not a coincidence. So all of the symbolism through all of the centuries finds its climax right here as the Lamb of God is handed over to be crucified. Now, I have 1 minute to tell you what I think about Pilate. Okay. In fact, let me give you 3 words that describe Pilate. And at times, if we look in the mirror, we see these 3 words on our own foreheads. Pilate was a cynic. He had no moral foundation. He said, "What is truth? What is truth?" You can read it with the tone of the cynic in your voice. He was a, "What is truth? Follow what you determine. All that matters is what you think. Do what you think." And this is the age in which we live. In fact, it's not just our age. This has been the path of people since the very beginning, people doing that which is right in their own eyes. He was the cynic. And the world is filled today with people who have no foundation in their lives, just the way Pilate had no foundation. This is why you must embrace the message of the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. Pilate was a pragmatist. He was a pragmatist. You understand what I mean by that word? He acted solely on the basis of self-interest. I will do what I think is best for me. We don't see him approaching any of this by asking, what is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to do? How can I, instead, how can I climb the ladder and grab hold of power and success? This is what moved Pilate. He only wanted to save his job and ultimately to save his life. He was a pragmatist, so he was willing to condemn an innocent man for his own convenience. The pragmatist lives life asking questions like, what's in this for me? Let me love myself, let me pamper myself. And if I think that a choice based on principle will compromise my happiness, the principle will be sacrificed every time. This is the pragmatist. Pilate presented himself as a victim. Presented himself as a victim. He made vain excuses for his failure. Pronounced condemnation on Jesus, even though he didn't find any fault in him. In Matthew's gospel, I think it is, let me double check here. Yes, in Matthew's account of the trial, after Pilate pronounced Jesus' innocence for the third time, he called for a basin of water to be brought to him. And he symbolically washed his hands in the water, indicating that he was washing away any guilt that he had for this man's life. Pilate thought that he was a victim. It was everybody else's fault. It's not his fault. I'm innocent. Just look at me, wash away my guilt. We've been doing that ever since the Garden of Eden. We've always found somebody else we can blame. We can blame our parents, blame our peers, blame society, blame circumstances. The fault is not theirs ultimately. Fault's our own. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. You know, there is a myth that grew up around Pontius Pilate. We're not certain where he ended up dying. He moved back into Europe, and there are several places that lay. I don't know why any place would want to lay claim to him, but yeah, he died here. Several places, but there's one place in particular that has this myth that grew up that on the mountain slope just outside the town, you can from time to time see Pilate's ghost washing his hands. Washing his hands. Now that's a myth, okay? To make sure you understand, that's a myth. But I want you to understand here is that anyone who pursues self-interest without regard for the message of Christ will have no excuse when they stand before the Lord on the day of judgment. No excuse at all. So embrace the message of the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. No excuses. You're not a victim. Give up self-interest and submit to him. Father, we thank you for this disturbing story of this man. Help us to take its lessons to heart. And our prayer, as always, is that anyone who hears this lesson will reach the point of decision. I must have Christ. Without Christ, I have no hope. And will submit to him, seeking the forgiveness that he alone can give. We pray, dear Lord, that you will save those who are lost. We pray this in Jesus' name.